Κυρίες και κύριοι, φίλοι και συνάδελφοι του Ολλανδικού Ινστιτούτου, με μεγάλη χαρά σας καλωσορίζουμε στην ετήσια αναφορά μας. Πρώτα απ' όλα, θέλουμε να ευχαριστήσουμε τους Έλληνες συναδέλφους μας που μας φιλοξενούν και μας βοηθούν όλα αυτά τα χρόνια. Ειδικά ευχαριστούμε η Υπουργό κυρία Μενδώνη, τις κυρίες Αδαμβελένη, Παπαγεωργίου, Κουντούρη, Μπενίση, Κουρβέλου και Μπουμπούλη του Υπουργείου Πολιτισμού και Αθλητισμού, της κυρίας Μπάτσιου και Ροντήρη της Εφορίας Μαγνησίας, της κυρίας Χαραμή και Κουρούνη και τον κύριο Κοντογιάννη της Εφορίας Φιωτίας, της κυρίας Πάντου, Χαραλάμπους και Μαλτέζου από την Εφορία Λακωνίας, της κυρίας Παπασταύρου και Μερκούρη από την Εφορία Ζακίνθου, της κυρίας Σίμωση, Σταυρουλάκη και Κωνσταρέλη και τον κύριο Χριστοδούλου της Εφορίας Εύιας, την κυρία Καστελάνου από το Τμήμα Τεχνικών Ερευνών Αναστήλωσης και Προδιαγραφών και τον κύριο Παπαγεωργίου από το Οργανισμό Διαχείρισης και Αναπτύξης Πολιτιστικών Πόρων. Να ευχαριστήσω και συναδέλφους όπως ο κύριος Λόλος από το Πανεπιστήμιο Θεσσαλίας, ο κύριος Μπλάκλερ από το πρόγραμμα της Χαλκίδας, ο κύριος Πολίτης από την Ελληνική Εταιρεία Σπουδών Εγγύης Ανατολής και την κυρία Ευκλίδου από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Θεσσαλονίκης. And all colleagues from the foreign schools, universities and museums in Greece. Together with the staff of the ambassador of Susanne Terstal, who couldn't make it today, we started a warm collaboration in preparation of and during the autumn 2022 state visits of King Willem-Alexander and Queen Maxima in Greece, and I look forward for several more years of warm collaboration together with Mrs. Terstal, Mr. Terkeule and their team. During that state visit, the royal couple attended a meeting with both the Greek and the Dutch ombudsman at NIA, and had the chance to visit our facilities and learn more about how our institute works. In collaboration with the Dutch Embassy in Athens, the Jewish Museum, and the Eforia of Thessaloniki, NIA also had the chance to take the royal couple on the first visit to Thessaloniki, where Dr. Kalliopi Evklidou and myself organized an archaeological walk that led them along the Church of Ios Dimitrios, the Roman Agora, Bey Hammam, and the Jewish Quarter. We were told several times by both Willem-Alexander and Maxima that it will certainly not be their last visit to Thessaloniki. NIA would not be the vibrant institute without its great team. Daily collaboration with a well-working group of colleagues has shown its importance since I came and before that, of course. And this was clear again during our team-building trip to Skiros in September. Being all in one place, visiting sites, and talking over a great meal is a strong recommendation for all institutes. This annual lecture will give an overview of our activities in the year 2022. We will start with a selection of our education activities. As every year, NIA, UvA's Modern Greek Department, and Taalhuis Amsterdam organize two different levels of intensive Greek courses in Athens for students of our 6 participant Dutch universities, while of course external students are very welcome too, and we see regular people coming through to this course. The summer school for bachelor students of all Dutch universities on urban heritage is the main common initiative by all the Dutch research institutes abroad. In 2022, it took place in Rome and Athens, but this year it also included Florence, and next year probably Cairo may join in as well. Attracting high application numbers, the program kicks off in Utrecht, where students learn about interdisciplinary research, meet the supervisors for each city, and prepare their research methods. Then they travel to the cities, and here in Athens in 2022, we had one group that worked on the Parthenon marbles and a second one on both the archaeological and the Acropolis museums under the supervision of Nicholas Karakalis, assistant professor at the University of the Aegean. A final presentation open to the wider audience was held here in the NIA library at the end of July. In October 22, the second autumn summer school called Audiovisual Methods in Archaeology and Heritage Studies was organized by NIA and the University of Leiden for students of all levels in archaeology and heritage. The course was a constructive collaboration between Natalia Donner, Trifon Bambilis, Maro Anastopoulou, Dana Papachristou, and Yorgos Samandas. The aim of the seminar is to provide students with the experience of filming in a highly diverse and multi-layered urban setting, and get familiarized with diverse modes of narration, discuss the products of their research with experts in Athens, and have an overview of current debates and research topics in audiovisual methodology. By participating and learning the filming and post-production processes, the students gain practical experience in a new context, use their skills, expand the networks, and learn how to present their findings to a wider local and global audience. Audiovisual and multimodal applications are nowadays broadly used in heritage and museum studies, fostering communication between researchers and visitors, as well as promoting heritage sites and museums collections. Furthermore, as digital media has become increasingly affordable and accessible, visual representation is expanding across several contexts of archaeology, becoming a prominent tool for documentation, analysis, and interpretation within the discipline. Several other courses that were conducted at NIA are mentioned on the slide here, and some of them are yearly recurring programs that always attract high application numbers. We now turn to NIA's research activities, and we begin with archaeology. In collaboration with the German Archaeological Institute at Athens, the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and the Hellenic Foundation for Research and Innovation, NIA co-organized the 5th annual meeting of the Necropolis Research Network on the study of cremation, held in Athens in October 2022. The 25 papers covered ongoing research on cremation burials and evidence, and such research carried out in several regions around the Mediterranean basin, including the entire Aegean, Cyprus, the Levantine region, the Black Sea area, and Sicily. Chronologically, papers ranged from the Neolithic period until the Hellenistic and Roman times. While COVID did not stop on our on-site activities any longer, its impact was still felt at the level of publications. While not entirely executed at NIA in 2022, myself and co-editors published the last ERC Set in Stone edited volume, which came out in September 2022. The volume joined papers of a Leiden-based workshop held in 2019 with those of a double European Association of Archaeologists session at Budapest, but held online in the month of August of 2020. Because of the sheer enthusiasm of all participants of papers and writers for the volume, working hard to get this paper out or this publication was a pleasure, despite the COVID obstacles. NIA continued its activities in relation to the contemporary history of Greece with the presentation of the book by Katerina Brejani entitled From the Greek Struggle of Independence to the Forced Exchange of Populations, Representations of the Revolution in the Interwar Period, Ceremonies, Symbols and Emblems. This was hosted by NIA and featured a very interesting discussion led by Alex Lambrou of Marburg University, Alex Papadopoulos from the University of Chicago, and Spiridon Plumidis of the ECPA University on the uses and representations of the Greek Revolution in 1821 during the interwar period, and especially in the socio-political context that had formed in Greece after the 1922 failed Asia Minor campaign. In September 22, a two-day international conference entitled Balkan Worlds 1922 and the End of Empires was co-organized between the University of Macedonia and NIA at Thessaloniki in memory of 100 years of the disaster that ended the Asia Minor campaign. The conference examined the gradual decomposition of the Ottoman Empire and the transformation of Turkey into a new nation state in relation to the First World War and the Lausanne Treaty that followed. The presentations examined the emergence of the new Turkish nationalism and the transformation of religion, the new political alliances that changed Turkey and affected Greece, and the general changes in the social and political life during this period. The keynote lecture of Professor Erik Surger of Leiden University focused on the political and military changes of Smyrna during 1922 that eventually affected, tragically, the Greek populations of the city. The conference was attended by a large number of students and academics, and its proceedings will be published in Greek by the University of Macedonia. In May 22, NIA, the Research Institute for Culture, Cognition, History and Heritage of the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, and the workshop on the study of the Jews of Greece held a 2-day international workshop on Jewish responses to persecution and rescue efforts during the Holocaust. Due to COVID regulations, the workshop allowed the physical presence of 35 participants, whereas the rest of the attendants participated through a live stream. The program of the workshop consisted of 3 keynote lectures and 13 papers on the methodological, empirical, and comparative issues underpinning the study of the workshop's broader themes. The program contained research concentrating on the persecution and survival of the Jewish population of Greece, Poland, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia, sometimes through the presentation of extensively documented individual microhistories of persecution and survival. NIA co-organized with the Athens Comics Library and Comic Dome Athens 22 the workshop Graphic Wanderings, Finding Stories in Urban Space. 20 participants walked the city and used sketching as a method to discover and describe the city's histories and identities. Drawing on psychogeography and comics, Tanya Cardoza from the University of Amsterdam, who led the workshop with the assistance of Nicolas Karachadis, showed how to use all senses to understand the city on the ground and then experiment with the language of comics and illustrated maps to create a visual narrative. NIA also supported key events such as the Co-Museum Conference, which in December 22 was about culture, care and healing. Another mega event started in February this year, but its program was revealed in December 22, the Eleusis Cultural Capital of Europe of 23. As every year, NIA awarded several grants to young and upcoming scholars. The stipendia helped PhD students in their final year. The grants are open to MA students. The residence grants help people to carry out their research through a short stay at NIA. And the development grants support MA students to orientate themselves towards a future in academia through the PhD track. Together with the other Dutch research institutes abroad, a new visiting professorship program was set up in 21. In 22, Vladimir Stissi from the University of Amsterdam stayed at NIA to work on publishing his fieldwork in ancient Halos and organizing a workshop concerning the heritage of Greek wine drinking. Enno Mazurel from the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam worked closely together with the Dutch Embassy in Athens on aspects of Greek entrepreneurship and startups. Also in 22, NIA decided to boost its weblog by actively stimulating NIA bursaries, scholarship holders, and other guests to contribute to the content of the NIA blog. The enthusiastic personal accounts of students and researchers, such as Tanya Cardozo, Yoon Chi, Ria Lenting, Lua Valina de Jong, and Marieke Gelderblom, do not only increase the number of visitors of our blog, but also offer a wonderful opportunity to present the wide-ranging areas of study and research topics that the NIA bursaries and young researchers conduct at the Institute. An update on the library is also in place. The collection has been enriched with about 230 new acquisitions, the cataloguing of which is an ongoing process. In 2022, the cataloguing of the Trojanus collection continued, and more or less the entire collection is now available on the online catalogue. On May 25th, NIA celebrated the occasion of the donation of Professor Trojanus' book collection to the Institute. NIA honored the donator by creating a separate stamp that can be found in the title page of each book, by adding the acronym TC at the top of the call number, and by housing the collection in a dedicated section of our library. The May celebration included a symposium on the themes of Byzantine law to honor Professor Trojanus' life work. The symposium was organized by Daphne Penna from the Legal History Department of the University of Groningen in cooperation with Soteria Nicolou, our NIA librarian. Together, they were the driving forces behind this event, with speakers from the University of Groningen, the National and Capodistrian University of Athens, and the director of the Research Center of the History of Greek Law at the Academy of Athens. Also, Professor Trianus himself addressed his colleagues and all students and mentioned their collaboration before all attendees had the chance to take a tour of the library and see the Trianus collection for themselves. Now we turn to the fieldwork projects conducted in 22. This map shows the sites where NIA and the Dutch universities conduct fieldwork projects. We start with the excavations at Magula Plataniotiki under the direction of Vladimir Stissi, Vaso Rondiri, Yanis Lolos, and Sofia Vutsaki. Vladimir Stissi reports as follows. The excavation in Trench 6 was a follow-up of the work of last year. The focus was on deepening, but at the northwest and southwest side, the trench was also extended. It now forms a rectangle of about 14 by 9 meters. The primary goal of the extensions was to find parts of the wall defining the spaces in the northwest corner and at the south end of the trench. The latter was not found, but the other was. A row of wall stones, partly hidden in the profile, close to the northwestern corner of the trench, indicates that the room here would have been similar in size to its eastern neighbor, about 4 by 4 meters. The excavated spaces are separated by an alley in the middle of the trench. Two spaces north of the alley show a similar stratigraphy. The topsoil layer is followed by a post-abandonment layer. Towards the upper levels of the preserved walls, the soil gradually becomes more uniform. Even though flat-lying pottery sherds, tile fragments, and wall features suggest horizontal layering and the presence of use levels, there is no discernible horizontal stratigraphy. This is problematic because the rows of stones bordering the southern and eastern perimeter wall of the block, either a foundation or the top of an earlier construction, must have been below a floor. The complex buildup of the wall separating the two northern rooms with a blocked doorway and apparently at least two building phases also suggests the presence of unseen floor levels. The scarce pottery does not offer any clues, as it all seems to fit a generic 400 to 350 BCE date range. While we can tentatively connect the excavated spaces with the final phases of use, the destruction and the initial abandonment of the site, connected to its conquest by the Macedonian army in 346 BCE, we cannot separate yet the latest pre-346 use phase from the earlier ones, which we do seem to have reached. The situation in the southern spaces of our trench is more complex because we cannot establish the sizes of the spaces yet. Further excavation of the upper levels repeated the sequence encountered in 2021, similar to what is described above for the northern rooms. But unlike the situation in the north, there is a chronological sequence at lower levels, reaching the years around 400 BCE at the deepest points. Below an earlier 4th century level and the mid-4th century phase also encountered in the northern rooms. Connecting the stratigraphy to the wall phasing remains thus an issue. The walls generally seem to comprise at least two phases, but details are different elsewhere, and different sides of our spaces do not show uniform developments. An interesting feature in the central room was that the previously visible concentration of tiles in its northwest corner now turned out to come from a thick pile consisting of mixed, reddish, partly burnt mud brick and large tile fragments. Many mud brick fragments show reed impressions, a few have traces of stucco, and some are recognizable as part of rectangular bricks. The surface of the pile, which reaches almost a meter in depth, dives towards the southeast. The fragmentation and incompleteness of the tiles and bricks suggest that this is a secondary dump. It remains unclear whether, on the one hand, the rubble fill continues underneath the alley on the north, as some tile fragments still in the profile might suggest, or it is deposited against the north wall of the room. All in all, the 2022 work confirmed the earlier picture of a complex sequence of layers and structures throughout the trench. While in the southern part, the deeper layers seem to reach till about 400 BCE, the chronological depth in the north remains uncertain. The contrast between a more uniform sequence north of the alley and more variation between the rooms and walls in the south, already spotted in 2021, remains quite remarkable. We move to Evia, where Ioanita Vroom directs, together with Mrs. Simosi, Mr. Christodoulou, Mrs. Costarelli, Andrew Blackler, and Dino Politis, the survey project Hinterland of Medieval Chalkida since 2021. During the summer of 22, the first systematic fieldwork campaign of the HMC project was undertaken by a Dutch-Greek international team on the island of Evia. This archaeological endeavor is organized and managed by the collaboration between Leiden University through NIA, the Ephorate of Antiquities of Evia, and the Hellenic Society of Near Eastern Studies in Chalkida. The region under study is defined by the valleys between the Lila and Messapian rivers to the north and east of the modern city of Chalkida in central Evia. The total research area covers approximately 30,000 square meters as shown on the map. The chronological emphasis of the project is highlighting the medieval and post-medieval periods in the research area covering Byzantine, Crusader Latin, and Ottoman times, that is to say from about the mid-4th to the mid-19th centuries. The main objectives of the research projects are threefold. First, to gain insight in the long-term changes in habitation, land use, water systems, military organization, and socioeconomic structures of the hinterland of Chalkida from Byzantine to Ottoman times. Second, to construct, based on surveys and pottery finds, a typochronological framework to understand ceramic use and production throughout the periods under study, and build a model of trends and transformations of local, regional, interregional, and long-distance distribution patterns and pottery manufacturing. And third, to develop a better understanding of relations of general trade and industrial systems between Chalkida and its hinterlands, within the Byzantine Empire and the Latin and Islamic Eastern Mediterranean. Evia, and particularly its central area around Chalkida, formed over nearly 2 centuries a key hub in the trading network of the Venetian Republic in the East Mediterranean. However, until recently, hardly any systematic archaeological study, let alone an intensive field survey, has been undertaken to shed light on the material remains of the Crusader, Venetian, or Ottoman presence on the island. To address this gap, the 2022 HMC project season encompassed an extensive survey in the research area, an intensive survey on 3 selected sites, and a start of the material analysis of the collected finds. The map shows some sites in the Katostini upland and the Lelantine plain that were visited during the 2022 extensive survey by the team. Additional research activities included the examination of all topographical maps, ranging in date from the 13th to the 20th centuries, satellite and aerial imagery, and Ottoman written documents and administration records. The emphasis of the 2022 campaign was on the northern part of the project's research area, on the sites located in the Messapian Valley region. An intensive survey was carried out on 3 sites, Castries, Vigies, and Diovouna. At each of the sites, different strategies were employed and diverse results emerged, but all 3 sites were documented using photography, drone footage, and measurements taken by GPS and total station. Castries is a strategically located plateau site that overlooks the Messapian plain to the south. The survey was conducted in a grid system in which each of the squares measured 5 by 5 meters. The material that was collected within this grid system pointed to some activity from pre-Roman times, but most of the material was medieval, dating to the Byzantine and Venetian periods, with a clear peak in the 13th century. The plateau was fortified with walls and contained various architectural features, shown on the map in purple lines. Another recorded feature was the presence of a kiln just below the plateau. It was partly cut in the bedrock and partly constructed out of limestone bricks. The kiln displayed very obvious useware, with its lower half being discolored due to heating. At Vigies, 4 separate archaeological zones were identified. Zone 1 was a settlement dating to the Crusader or Frankish period and located at the southern foot of the hill. The site has been identified by 2 structures that were still present. A very dense pottery scatter was located in the area around these structures. Zone 2 was a Frankish or Crusader stronghold on top of the hill. It included 2 structures, a tower and a support building. Both were enclosed by a perimeter wall. Just to the south of the 2 structures, there was an open area where a survey in lines had been carried out by the team. Finally, the other 2 zones predated the medieval period and will not be discussed here. At Diovuna, a traditional survey was nearly impossible due to the dense vegetation and the mossy ground cover. The research emphasis for this site was on documenting the main architectural remains. The most noteworthy feature was the discovery of a kiln, shown on the right, with a similar construction and useware as the one in Castries. A second feature, visible left below, includes the remains of a medieval tower that has been heavily disturbed in the past. The lack of findings on this site made it difficult to date these structures, or to say anything more about their use with more certainty. Associated with the medieval Chalkida survey is the work carried out and reported here by Andrew Blackler on the sampling of wood and mortar from within the walls of 7 towers in the hinterland of Chalkida. The work was organized by Dr. Blackler in October 22 with sponsorship from the Castle Studies Trust. A number of different analytical techniques were used by the Democritos laboratory in Athens, but the prime method, carbon-14, allowed us to estimate the age of the samples and therefore the construction date of the towers. The study of the mortar helped to separate out different building phases of the Baililekas or Psagana tower. This, in conjunction with dating the wood samples, an understanding of the building's architecture and construction materials, allows the team to provisionally date the main phase of the tower's construction to the 14th century. Unfortunately, the masonry at the highest level was too unstable to attempt taking samples, so it can only be conjectured that this final phase dated to the Ottoman period. Further analysis will be undertaken in late 23, and final results are expected in 24. From the Leiden-Cambridge Boeotia project, John Bindliff reports as follows. The 2022 season focused first on the study of the ceramic collection from the completed urban surface survey at Coronea, and second on the ceramic study and drone photography of the rural sites around the ancient city of Haliartos. You can see here in larger detail the rural sites discovered around the ancient Haliartos city. While Calliope Sari completed her study of the prehistoric ceramics from the Haliartos rural sites, Lieve Donnellan was using drone photography to capture their landscape location, such as the 14th century CE Crusader Tower near the modern town of Haliartos, and the major Bronze Age village at Kazarma, the ancient site of Ongestos. Vladimir Stisi and Anna Meens began the study of the large ceramic collection from our urban survey of the ancient city of Coronea, based on 900 collection grids. The town was first settled in protohistoric times, and when the hill was abandoned after late antiquity, it was replaced by a small Byzantine village at its northern foot, marked by a controlling Crusader tower. It is hoped that this large collection with precise location properties will reveal variation in wealth, economic, and trade access across the Greek and Roman domestic quarters of the city. We have come to the end of this overview of the activities of the Netherlands Institute, and I would like to introduce now our speaker of tonight. Trained as an archaeologist, Paul Crielaard is Professor of Mediterranean, Pre- and Proto-Historical Archaeology at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. He obtained his PhD degree cum laude from the University of Amsterdam on a thesis entitled The Euboeans Overseas, Long-Distance Contacts and Colonization as Status Activities in Early Iron Age Greece. He later took up a postdoctoral research position at the same university and served as acting director of the Netherlands Institute at Athens from 91 until 93. In 2016, he was visiting professor and director of studies at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. His research focuses on the early Iron Age and Archaic periods, often combining written and archaeological information. He has published extensively on topics such as interconnections between archaeology and literary evidence, Greek colonization, elites and elite behavior, the construction of identities in the archaic period, archaeology and the Homeric epics, and many aspects of interconnectivity within the Mediterranean. Paul Crielaard has been involved in fieldwork in Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, and Italy, and has been the co-director of the La Mastuola field project in Puglia in Italy. Since 2010, he directs the Makri archaeological project in Karystos and the southern Evia sea and land routes projects, both on the island of Evia. He's currently also the PI of the project called What Went into the Melting Pot? Land Use, Agriculture and Craft Production as Indicators for the Contributions of Greek Migrants and Local Inhabitants to the so-called Greek colonization in Italy between 800 and 550 BC. This 3-year team project is funded by an NWO-free competition grant. We are very pleased, Jan-Paul, to welcome you to NIA tonight and listen to your talk, The Cultic Landscape of the Karystia, a decade of field research in southern Evia by the Netherlands Institute in Athens.
Good evening. First of all, I wish to thank Professor Brysbaert and the staff of the Netherlands Institute at Athens for inviting me to give the annual lecture of 2023. It's both a pleasure and an honor. And this is also a good opportunity to thank them for the help, advice, and support that they provided over the years and that contributed much to make the fieldwork project that I present here today successful. Before we go over to the cultic landscape, let me start by showing you some pretty pictures of the landscape of southern Evia. Some of you might know it. For some, it may be a different world. It is sometimes a different world. Interesting geological formations. A view of today's Karystos from the marble quarries. Actually, the Valley of Karystos itself is one of the few flat areas in this region. As you can see here, a sphere picture of one of our survey days, people standing on top of a Hellenistic tower, I believe. The rough coast of Cape Cavireas. And here as well, the so-called Douro Channel. And finally, one of the most memorable elements in the Christian landscape is a couple of Roman columns lying in situ in the quarries. All right. The cultic landscape of southern Evia is relatively well known, although not in great detail. In my lecture this evening, I will reflect on some of the outcomes of fieldwork that has been carried out since 2010 under the aegis of the Netherlands Institute at Athens by VU University Amsterdam in collaboration with the 11th F-Rate of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities, now EFA. I will give an overview of the latest insights obtained from our excavations at Makri and survey work in a number of other areas in the Karystia. Finally, I will attempt to sketch how these outcomes can be related to other cult places in the Karystia and how this contributes to our knowledge of the wider cultic landscape of southern Evia and indeed the wider picture of Evia and adjacent islands and mainland regions. Until some 10 years ago, southern Evia was especially known for its extensive surveys, starting with Dr. Donald Keller's one-man survey in 1979, and continued by teams under the direction of Keller or his team members in different parts of the Karystia, among others by Wiggins, who is here with us in the audience. In addition to these surveys, the archaeology of the region is known thanks to several salvage excavations that were conducted by the 11th Ephorate in various parts in and around modern Karystos, Plakari included. Drs. Maria Hidirglu, also here today, and Dr. Athina Chatzidimitriou. I happen to see that she's following it online. Hello, Athina. Were instrumental in this. Regular excavations focusing on the prehistoric periods were carried out by Zarko Tankosic and Fanis Mavridis at the Ayatriada cave in the foothills of Mount Ochi, and since some year at Gourmadi, as well as at Ekalampodis by Padagopoulos, while Keller himself dug a farmstead belonging to the classical period at Paleopetari on the Paksimari Peninsula. Compared to other regions in Greece, the picture is fragmentary and lacunose, to which it should be immediately added that Dr. Maria Hidirglu, in her PhD thesis, did an admirable job by bringing all the pieces of this archaeological and epigraphic puzzle together. Our fieldwork between 2010 and 2016 comprised a multidisciplinary research that combined systematic excavations with geoarchaeological landscape research, paleoecology, archaeobotany, zooarchaeology, and the study of marine faunal remains. I forgot to point out that this is a map showing previous surveys in the area. The red circles are the locations where excavations have taken place, both regular excavations and salvage excavations. Our research yielded remains of the final Neolithic, as well as a sanctuary covering the sub-Mycenaean to classical period. Next to this, between 2016 and 2019, we carried out pedestrian and drone surveys in a number of areas, partly complementary to previous surveys, partly with very specific research aims in mind. These surveys were part of a larger project directed towards a regional diachronic study of the sea and land routes of southern Evia, named the Sessler Project. As for the region's maritime communications, we focused especially on harbor towns, such as Karystia, Raistos, harbor installations, coastal towers, and more broadly speaking, the use of the ancient coastal landscape. The research on overland routes included roads and routes for everyday use connecting settlements and farmsteads, the Roman roads for the transportation of Cipollino marble from the Mili and Kilindri quarries to the coast, and a system of roads between the Plakari and Karababa sanctuaries, to which I will return in a minute. Since 2017, we have studied the archaeological material, especially from the Plakari sanctuary, which provides us with some new insights into cult practices, votives, and votaries. Let us start with Plakari. Plakari is a low schist ridge with a maximum elevation of 85 meters above sea level, about 2 kilometers west of modern-day Karystos. It is strategically located on the northwestern side of the Bay of Karystos. The top offers an excellent view over much of the surrounding area, and especially important, the Bay of Karystos. Incoming ships first had to traverse the entire bay, which would have made it virtually impossible to approach Plakari unnoticed. And on this slide, you see a so-called view shed, then the green area that is the area that is visible from the Plakari hilltop. A program of intensive coring carried out in the coastal areas to the west and east of Plakari in order to investigate the subsoil stratigraphy revealed that until an advanced stage of the first millennium BC, the coastline was much further inland compared to today, making Plakari into a sort of cape jutting into the sea. A perennial stream, today's Rigas River, flowed to the east-northeast of Makri and debouched into the sea, probably at the foot of the hill, as it does today. It was part of a dynamic coastal landscape with wetlands, and which was influenced also by the sea and the stream, which periodically changed its course and discharged much alluvial material. In order to appreciate the settlement and its sanctuary, it's important to take into consideration the habitation history of the Karystia. The southern part of Evia was inhabited during the Neolithic period and the early and middle Bronze Age, but became deserted after the beginning of the late Bronze Age. At the hilltop site of Ios Nikolaos, there is evidence of habitation for the Middle Bronze Age and the first part of the Mycenaean period. You see that indicated on this map. But during most of the Palatial period, so the Mycenaean palace in southern Euboea had been deserted. It is true that Linear B documents from Thebes mention a place called Karuto, which has been identified with Karystos. However, given the extreme paucity of Mycenaean finds, and especially LH3B material, this place must be located outside what was later known as the Karystia. When Makri became settled at the very beginning of the Iron Age, that is in the 11th century BC, the region had not been inhabited for some 3 to 4 centuries. We may speculate that the earliest inhabitants who settled in South Euboea brought the name Karystos with them from their original home and gave it to this new settlement, as was done by later migrants settled in Italy, for instance. Think of Kyme in Campania or Naxos in Sicily. This reoccupation of the region after so many centuries means that the new inhabitants encountered terra nullius, a landscape devoid of associations with particular deities, spirits, ancestors, etc., and with next to no remains referring to an earlier heroic past. One of the very few exceptions were the final Neolithic terrace or fortification walls at Makri, which in some places were standing up to a height of 3 meters. These walls may have been one of the attractions to settle on the seaside hill. Here you see how this final Neolithic wall has degraded since some roads had been bulldozed next to it. Among the earliest finds from the Makri sanctuary, we have now identified no less than 10 sub-Mycenaean fibulae and 3 sub-Mycenaean dress pins. In addition to these, there are 2 elongated fibulae with a large leaf-shaped catch plate and large catch. The arch bow, twisted near the catch plate, gives the type an early feel. I have showed it to specialists in Aegean, Italian and Balkan metalwork, but none have seen the type before, so any suggestions from the audience are more than welcome. The Makri hilltop probably functioned as an acropolis, but as the archaeological evidence suggests, it was right from the start also reserved for cultic activities. Immediately to the west of the summit of Makri, a sacred place was installed on a small natural platform that was later extended with the help of retaining and terminus walls. Most of the earliest material found in the sanctuary, however, was part of what we have named a sacrificial refuse area, an open-air deposit lying to the south of the sanctuary's upper terrace, but still within the confines of the cult place. This sacrificial refuse area contained large amounts of animal bones, charcoal, ceramics, and small finds identifiable as votive offerings. Personal ornaments and pottery datable to the proto-geometric and sub or early geometric periods suggest that cult activities continued after the sub-geometric period, although on a small scale, during the 10th and 9th century BC. On this slide you see that metalwork and pottery shows there is a continuity of cult. The small amount of 10th and 9th century pottery includes amphora and crater fragments, as well as sherds of drinking vessels. In other words, the necessary items for communal drinking practices. Besides the sub-Mycenaean dress items just referred to, there are a few dress pins and fibulae that date to the proto-geometric and sub-geometric periods and can only be interpreted as votive offerings. In this respect, Makri is somewhat deviant from the general pattern in the early Iron Age Aegean, where in many locations cult places go back to the 8th or 7th century. It is likely that Makri, being a new foundation, provided an important stimulus to create a sacred place. The group building activities and communal rituals connected to this must have contributed to establishing a sense of community. To this early phase also date 3 chance finds that were discovered in 2019 on a bulldozed road on the saddle immediately to the northwest of the Makri hilltop. It concerns a gold fingering, a gold mushroom-shaped headed earring decorated with zigzags, and a bronze spherical element belonging to a pin of vibula, all found together within a layer of dark material. The gold ornaments find close parallels in sub-proto-geometric grey material from Lefkandi, that is about 900 to 875 BC. The presence of a large worked stone slab on a short distance to the east that obviously had been pushed aside by a bulldozer during road construction may indicate that there had been one or more tombs in the area. During the 8th century, we see an intensification of cult activities at Makri. The sacrificial refuse area yielded some 33,000 pottery fragments and more than 430 small finds. The majority of the pottery dates to the Middle Geometric II and Late Geometric periods. Dr. Ksenia Garambidou, also in the audience here today, who studies the ceramics for publication, reports that the painted finewares, which include many imports from Attica, represent the whole range of vessels needed to transport, store, mix, distribute, and consume wine on a considerable scale and probably on frequent occasions. We assume that a large part of the over 26,000 fragments of animal bones, also found in the sacrificial refuse area, are to be associated with the same phase of increased cult activity. Most of the identifiable animal bones belong to sheep, goat, 80%, followed at a distance by cattle, 8.5%, and pigs, only 0.3%. Of the sheep-goat fragments, only a small portion, 6.5%, were burned. Most of these burned fragments were from the femia and the lower part of the tail, which matches with what later literary and iconographic sources tell us about the god's portion. The much larger percentage of unburned bones suggests that most of the meat was cooked before consumption, probably by those attending the sacrifices. The 8th century is also the period when we have the first solid settlement evidence at Makri. Dr. Maria Hideglu uncovered in rescue excavations lower down the southern slopes of the Makri Ridge curvilineal buildings and other stone structures with a host of pottery. Survey finds suggest that another nucleus of geometric and archaic habitation was found at the foot of the ridge on the northeast side, close to the Rias River. Let us now consider the development of the cult place and its layout during the subsequent phases. As already mentioned, the so-called sacrificial refuse area seem to have been in use right from the start of the century. At some point before the mid-7th century, a long wall running north-south was constructed on the hilltop. That is the red wall that you see on the plan, delineating a terrace or an open space to its east. During a following phase, perhaps in the later 7th century, we see a peribolus or terrace wall retaining a large stone fill was constructed, and these are the brown walls on the plan. In the southern part of this terrace, a semicircular stone altar was built in the 6th century. That is the yellow structure. Inside and next to this structure, we found burned bones and other burnt material, an iron hook, and a number of iron knives, probably used for hoisting and butchering sacrificial animals, a bronze filet mesomphalos, a large iron thrusting spear, a terracotta rattle, and a bronze horse figurine, suggesting that this was the focal point of a variety of rituals performed in the open air. The part of the terrace to the north of the altar was used for various purposes. Charcoal and other burnt material indicate that fire-related practices were taking place here. The find of a large variety of objects suggests that this area was used for placing dedications, including pottery and objects of glass and terracotta, for the deposition of cult equipment, such as knives and oboli, and for display of prestigious objects like offensive weapons and a decorated Argive shield and parts of a vehicle. Now, these are some objects that we found in connection with the altar. A very odd combination of a terracotta rattle. If you shake it, it rattles. The bronze filet mesomphalos I just mentioned, and well, you cannot see it under that sign, but that's a very large thrusting spear. First, we thought that it was a sword pen, but when our restorers, conservators worked on it, it appeared to be a lance of about 50 centimeters long. And this is part of an so-called Argive shield band. To the left, you see a complete shield found in Olympia and made from the same so-called stamp. Also at Olympia, and the same stamp was used for our shield band, showing Zeus and the lower register, probably Menelaus and Helena. So these were part of the objects that were on display on the western side of the sanctuary. One of the what do you call these prestigious items there. At some point in the classical period, presumably around 400 BC, the sanctuary was reconstructed and partly rebuilt. In the northwestern part, just outside the sanctuary proper, a building was added that catered for the storage of amphorae. A more drastic alteration of the layout of the sanctuary, however, was the construction of a monumental entrance or gateway, you see on the right of the slide, providing access to an open space. There is one that was enlarged, probably to accommodate larger groups of cult attendants. The entrance building was approached from the outside via a ramp running parallel to the north-south stretch of Terrace Wall 1. On the upper terrace, which may be considered to be the most sacred part of the sanctuary, a small building, Building A, was constructed or rebuilt, and a forecourt was laid out, partly covering earlier cult structures. That was the red building that you saw in previous plans. The small building probably functioned as a pantry and a storeroom for precious and sometimes antique items, like fibulae, pins, and other personal ornaments, as well as a piece of neck armor. This is some of the pottery. I'll return to that in a minute. And this is a so-called peritrachilion. A famous example comes from the tomb of Philip II in Vergina. That one is an iron example with a gilt coverage. Ours is made of bronze, and it bears an inscription, as you see, Ita Iota, probably an abbreviation for Hieru, belonging to the sanctuary. The small building A that was in operation during the classical period was destroyed, probably by fire, in circa 325 BC. This event marked the end of all cult activities at Makri. But this unfortunate course of events also meant that the building's entire inventory was preserved. It provides us with a large and diverse collection of mainly local pottery of the classical period, mostly related to wine consumption and cooking, as well as incense burners and lamps. Some pieces were literally still standing on the shelves, for which stone slabs were used. The presence of lamps are indicative of nocturnal cult activities. Some of the vessels carry inscriptions, including one that has a monograph composed of the letters Alpha P, possibly referring to Apollo, who may have been one of the male deities venerated at Makri. Furthermore, Building A contained door furnishings or furniture furnishings, as well as a large, almost completely preserved iron key. Many of the votive offerings found in the sacrificial refuse area and elsewhere in the sanctuary were broken, or in the case of metal objects, bent or folded. A case in point is a large fragment of a male so-called spherelaton figurine. On the left, you see one part of the body fragment, and with the help of the so-called dreros figurines, which are actually bigger than our piece, and we have sort of tried to piece different elements together, belonging to arms, legs, etc. But at the same time, it shows very clearly how this thing was taken apart, folded, and what we call ritually destroyed to prevent further use. Together with the numerous pottery fragments, this suggests that objects that were used in rituals or offered in a sanctuary were ritually destroyed before deposition. Locally produced terracotta figurines of helmeted figures, horses, bovines, and a wheel of a vehicle may reflect the interests or indeed lifestyle of part of the male population. More numerous are in fact votives that belong to the female sphere. And there are a number of reasons to hypothesize that these were dedicated as part of life cycle rituals. Pins and fibulae were probably dedicated together with clothing. There is literary evidence indicating that in archaic and classical Greece, girls reaching puberty dedicated their childhood clothes and belts in sanctuaries to mark the transition to their new status of marriageable women, the so-called protileia, or pre-wedding sacrifices that were part of rites of passage before marriage. Also, we have evidence that sometimes a lock of hair was dedicated to a local goddess. Perhaps the dozens of small rings, probably hair rings, that were found at Makri can be linked to this ritual. Finally, the many one-handled cups that we excavated can also be associated with children, particularly considering their limited liquid capacity, the ease of handling due to their vertical handle, and the fact that in various Iron Age cemeteries, these one-handled cups are found in child graves. They might have been employed in rituals where children were given small amounts of wine or other liquids, possibly as part of initiation rites, after which the one-handled cups were discarded. A parallel for this would be the Antisteria in Athens, the great spring festival of Dionysus, when storage vessels containing wine were opened and children were given miniature versions of the adult wine jugs. One item from the sexual refuse area that is more enigmatic but deserves special mention is a small object made of antler, the top of the slide. It is decorated with incised and painted lines which are hardly distinguishable. It seems to represent a highly schematized version of a human figure. There are no parallels from the Iron Age. Tracy Cullen, Lauren Talalay and I argue on the basis of parallels with some stone figurines from the northern Cyclades and the Euboean Gulf region that it dates to the early Cycladic period. Perhaps it was a pickup from a site in one of these regions and for one reason or another brought to the Makri sanctuary. Another item from the same context that I wish to single out here is a steatite scarab. Professor Marta Raven, curator of the Egyptian department of the National Museum of Antiquities at Leiden, identified this as a piece from the Middle Bronze Age, made either in Egypt or Palestine. Like with the antler idol, it is an enigma how this object, also an antique at the time of its dedication, ended up in the Makri sanctuary. After Makri had been the main habitation century during the earlier part of the Iron Age, a gradual infill of the landscape took place during the later Archaic and especially Classical period. And this is the evidence from the surveys show us on this map. As you see, dots become more numerous the further we proceed down in time. At the same time, the inland side of Palikore gained in importance, eventually becoming the main civic center during the classical, Hellenistic and Roman period. Unfortunately, we know next to nothing about sanctuaries and temples that the classical and Hellenistic polis of Karystia must have housed. It seems that the expansion of the settled area went hand in hand with that of the sacred landscape. During the Archaic period, a sanctuary was established on the Karababa hill, opposite of Makri, above a terraced area that may have belonged to Makri's catchment area. While in the fertile Cambos, which was now also brought under cultivation, a cult site was established on a low hill named Vunur. The sanctuary at Karababa is situated somewhat below the hill's summit. It is oriented towards the east, that is, towards the valley below, and more distantly, the Makri hilltop. The area is defined in the east and south by a large terrace wall, not visible on this slide, and in the west and southeast by two rock outcroppings inscribed with the letter combination Iota Epsilon and Omicron Rho, most likely an abbreviation of Horos Yeru, boundary of the holy place. This came out during our surveys some years ago. Dispersed over the enclosed area are a large semicircular feature made out of well-cut schist blocks, most probably an altar, a threshing floor with a rectangular rubble heap at its center, two platforms built of massive schist stones, A and B on the map, and part of a road. The threshing floor is an integral part of the sanctuary and is probably not of more recent date. It's partly supported by a long wall, number 24 on the map, that runs north, approaching the semicircular altar. The rectangular feature in its center may be the remains of an altar also. Note that threshing floors are sometimes called holy in ancient Greek literature, and are not an uncommon feature in the cultic domain, especially in relation to the cult of Demeter. The surface pottery found in the sanctuary area belongs to cooking and storage vessels and fine and medium wares for the consumption of food and drink. As part of our project focusing on land routes, we identified a road system leading from the foot of the Karababa hill to the sanctuary near its stop, connecting the Plakari and Karababa sanctuaries. We investigated the road fragments, usually marked by rows of stones set on their sides in the ground, by means of a combination of pedestrian and drone surveys in 2015, 16 and 19. Here you have some examples of these road markers. And once you sort of accustomed to them, you clearly see patterns, but the use of drones was instrumental to discover the actual pattern on the ground. We departed from the hypothesis that the road system catered for processions and developed a methodology to retrieve the road fragments and reconstruct and interpret this route. This methodology included both deductive and inductive approaches and explicitly took into consideration the elements of motion, presence, visibility, and intervisibility. After defining the area that was targeted for more detailed archaeological investigation, we systematically mapped the target area using low-altitude aerial photography with the help of a drone. The generated orthophotos were carefully inspected in order to identify features and areas of possible archaeological interest, including terrace walls, boundary walls, road segments, and additional features belonging to the sanctuary. These ortho images were loaded into a GIS together with the remotely sensed features and structures known from previous archaeological investigations that were factorized at polylines. A next stage comprised so-called ground truthing, namely field walking and revisiting and reassessing archaeological sites within the target area. This GIS data were taken into the fields by means of a handheld mobile device which facilitated navigation and enabled us to manipulate existing data and record new features as points, polylines, and polygons. This is a picture as shown on our handheld devices. And in the fields, we could add new polylines to indicate, for instance, road segments or walls in the field. After piecing together the various road fragments detected in the field, we walked this route several times to test our reconstructions and to explain the course that the route constructed took. Our point of departure was that on the one hand, roads are often laid out in accordance with the natural relief, but that on the other, procession roads do not necessarily take the easiest or the quickest route to a sanctuary. They often pass landscapes and landmarks of symbolic importance, at the same time keeping the sanctuaries within sight, wherever such was possible. The landscape between Plakari and Karababa is heavily terraced and is likely to constitute the agricultural catchment area of the Plakari settlement. In the northeast, east and southeast, the terraced area is enclosed by a long wall built of large, roughly hewn blocks of local stone. Some of the better preserved parts still stand almost as 1 meter high. You see here on the picture on the top right. And this was after a wildfire, which was unfortunate, of course, but it was helpful for our survey, I have to say. In the northwest, this boundary wall connects to the sanctuary area. There are several arguments to assume. So the green line that you see on the right, that is this big wall I was just referring to. So there are several arguments to assume that this boundary wall demarcated the land owned by the Karababa sanctuary. corresponding to so-called sacred land that is mentioned especially in epigraphic sources. Temene that could be leased out, usually to the highest bidder, to raise funds for festivals and sacrifices. The procession road that started at the foot of the Karababa hill connected the terraced area, the sacred land, and the Karababa sanctuary. Several areas, some with small stone-built facilities, can be identified as places where people participating in procession possibly made a stopover to perform cultic activities or to recuperate. By following our reconstructed route, several times we experienced that the road's trajectory directed our, or before us, the processionist's gaze in certain meaningful directions and towards eye-catching natural phenomena. We also experienced that the road sometimes makes a steep ascent at a gradient of 20 to 25%, sometimes even as high as 35%. Here, movement is linked to physical effort, which is an element that processions share with pilgrimage. Vistas of land and sea confronted the participants with various elements that made up the religious landscape, such as the Makri and Karababa precincts, or Mount Oki, and the boundary wall delineating the sacred land, as well as with more abstract concepts related to fertility, fecundity, and the earth. The latter aspects may be connected with the agricultural fields and the conspicuous backrock outcroppings that were incorporated in the road's course and seem to have had a religious significance. Regular processions had the potential to establish and re-establish social values and territorial claims by imbuing with social memory the space that was traversed and experienced. In this way, maintaining and cementing the identity and social coherence of the local community. Now, how does all this fit into the wider cultic landscape of the Karystia? Let's look briefly at the various cult places that are known up to now. First of all, a number of small rural sanctuaries have been identified in regional surveys, especially on the Paksimari Peninsula on the west side of the Bay of Karystos. They are centered on conspicuous rocky outcrops with terraces, both natural and built ones, steps, cavities, niches, and platforms cut out in the natural rock, and structures built with large, roughly cut schist blocks. Fragments of firewares found on the surface indicate that communal drinking practices took place in these locations. The earliest material here dates to the classical period. Overlooking most of the Karystia, and indeed a substantial part of the Aegean, is Mount Oki, on which summit a cult to Hera seems to have started in the early classical period, as evidenced by a pottery shirt with a dedicatory graffito. The famous Dracospito, the dragon's house, also on its top, datable to the 4th century BC, may be associated with the cult of Hera and possibly Zeus. In addition to these sanctuaries in the heart of the Polish territory, a number of peripheral cult places should be mentioned. First of all, the famous sanctuary of Poseidon at Geristos, at present-day Kastri, on the east coast. It is referred to in Homer's Odyssey and known through several later literary sources and scattered archaeological and epigraphic remains. The sandy embayment at Kastri constitutes the only protected port on this part of the coast of Evia. It was situated on a main sea route towards the northeastern Aegean, but is otherwise relatively isolated, which may be one of the reasons why later a part of the sanctuary was designated as an asylum. Our survey shows that in the late classical period it developed into a busy, partly industrial, partly agricultural harbour town. A paved road that can be provisionally dated to the classical period on the basis of find places in its proximity, probably connected the Geristos and Karystos. This was already discovered by Don Keller and his team. And here you see one of our team members just above the arrow. And you also see, get an impression of the monumental scale of the landscape. This is where the road is going. Here we are actually on the road itself. So that probably connected Karystos and Geristos. Geristos can be considered as a sanctuary marking Karystos' terrestrial and maritime territory. But on top of that, it performed supra-local functions. The hilltop sanctuary of Prophetis Elias, north of modern Makri, the northernmost area on this map, perhaps marks the extension of Karystos Chora in the west. Somewhat enigmatic remains the sanctuary at Ellenikopla-Mistou, which is situated at the bottom of the Potami Valley that contains a relatively large area of fertile alluvium at a spot that is well watered by both a nearby river and an adjacent spring. The sanctuary consists... The sanctuary consists of a monumental, well-built platform made of local schiststone and local and Parian marble, possibly constructed during two building phases, circa 500 and circa 400 BC, respectively. 6 unfinished Ionian capitals and part of pediment sculpture showing a lion killing a stag testify to the presence of a complex building or building entrance made of Parian marble, while 2 parts of a door frame, roof tiles, and terracotta lion-headed gutter or spouts dated to the late 5th century have been attributed to a propylon. Hans Goethe has identified about 40 inscriptions carved on the retaining wall forming the south side of the platform. One, dated to the 5th century BC, mentions a cult of Aphrodite. Another, of late classical, early Hellenistic date, the goddess Athena. It is open to speculation why such a monumental cult place, unusual for the Karystia, is situated in this specific location. Still more to the north, and even more isolated, is the small town of Ariambolis, that contains a small temple, possibly dated to the Archaic period. Ariambolis' very existence seems related to the melting and mining of iron in the area and may be excluded from our discussion of the sacred landscape of the Karystia. To return to the question of identity, landscape, people, and the supernatural, we may ask whether we can discern recurring features of the Karystian sacred landscape. To start with, a number of the sanctuaries in southern Evia have altars of semicircular shape, something that links them to similar altars in Disporikor and the recent find at Amaretos. Moreover, there seems to be a certain predilection for hypaethral, that is, open-air cult sites, often situated in high places. As we just saw, when the earliest Iron Age inhabitants of the Karystia settled the Makri, they built their first sanctuary on the summit of the hill they choose for their settlement. The highest point on the hill consists of a boulder-like rectangular rocky outcrop in which 2 niches and a ledge in front of it were hewn out, possibly for the placement of 1 or more statuettes or reliefs of stone or terracotta. This suggests, once more, that rocky outcrops and the living rock had a kind of special meaning and even were the subject of ritual actions and perhaps veneration. This impression we also get from a number of special places, like to be cult places on the Paksimadi Peninsula, already briefly referred to earlier. Not only are rocky outcrops an important feature, they're also conspicuous landmarks that can be seen from afar. Finally, part of the sanctuary of Karababa was the already referred to platform B. The raised platform was constructed around a 3 meters wide boulder with a natural niche facing the east. Through this boulder runs a niche or crack that is natural, but also shows tracing of being partly worked. Looking from west to east, Makri is visible through this crack. It's large enough to let a person pass through, who would then find him or herself on the other side of the platform facing east. It seems likely that it was because of this quality that the platform was constructed around the boulder. Sarah Karatas points out that rocky outcrops play a prominent role in the mythography, cult, and associated rituals of Demeter. They have been attested, sometimes in combination with cavities, rock-cut pits, and channels, for a number of open-air sanctuaries of Demeter, but Karatas acknowledges that rock sanctuaries with rock-cut niches, stairs, and terraces are also known for other Greek deities. Indeed, it may be noted that raised platforms and rocky high places were not restricted to one particular deity. Makri was probably associated with Apollo, perhaps Artemis, Karababa perhaps with Demeter, Mount Ochi with Hera and perhaps Zeus, and Elenikon with Athena and Aphrodite. These specific regions played a role in how and where in the Karystia the divine presence was experienced, and people could connect to their gods. In the case of Makri and Karababa, and the above-mentioned rural sanctuaries, rocks, boulders, and rocky outcrops played a role in the cultic rituals, while in the case of Karababa, and especially Mount Ochi, procession and pilgrimage to these high places was an inherent aspect of the location of the cult. To conclude, in this contribution, I try to contribute to the reconstruction of the sacred landscape of the Karystia on two different scales: the Karystia as a whole and the sacred landscape between the two sanctuaries connected by a procession road, that is, Makri and Karababa. I try to explore the multidimensionality and interconnectivity of the sacred landscape with the help of modern technology, but also by experiencing the landscape by taking into consideration movement, physical effort, and sight, including the sensation of different vistas of sanctuaries and holy places that together form the sacred landscape of the Karystia. Thank you for your attention.
Paul, thank you incredibly much for a very enlightening lecture on a region that a lot of people know where it is, but maybe not in such great detail. First of all, from the architectural perspective, we know about the quarries, we know about the Karystia marble, but seeing the landscape both in a constructed but also in a natural way combined by using both modern technologies and using the traditional ways of field walking, ground truthing, and combining the two, I think was a great way of getting to know the area. I think we should all go and visit. I'm sure there's plenty of questions. We will not hold the questions here, but I suggest we share the questions and the discussions upstairs with a drink and a bite, so everybody's welcome to join us upstairs. Thanks again, Jan Paul, for everything.